Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang in California with morsels of thought number 1510. 1500. 1510, 1510. And I want to, upside down is almost the same. Not really. Um, Today I want to go through some of the Tao, and then we'll read half of a story from the Book of Virtues. Let's see, where's the book? Okay, I will start with express yourself completely. Okay. Then keep quiet. Be like the forces of nature. When it blows, there is only wind. When it rains, there is only rain. When the clouds pass, the sun shines through. If you open yourself to the Tao, you are at one with the Tao, and you can embody it completely. If you open yourself to insight, you are at one with insight, and you can use it completely. If you open yourself to loss, you are at one with loss, and you can accept it completely. Open yourself to the Tao, then trust your natural responses, and everything will fall into place. Now, the Chinese of their universe is the Tao. It's called the Way. Tao means path through, a thoroughfare. Um, it's a thoroughfare, I have to say, and it is the equivalent of. There is otherwise no real religion in China that originated in China. Buddhism came from the India, um, over the Himalayas, and let's read next. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. He who rushes ahead doesn't go far. He who tries to shine dims his own light. He who defines himself can't know who he really is. He who has power over others can't empower himself. He who clings to his work will create nothing that endures. If you want to accord with the Tao, just do your job, then let go. Okay. Now, I want to read this one. Where did it go? Oh, here. Okay. I actually marked it up. That's why it looks confusing. Okay. Now, number 53 from Lao Tzu. This is from the Tao Te Ching, the Tao. The Tao Te Ching, it means the, the virtue, the thoroughfare of virtue script. Script. Script or treatise. No, it's more than a treatise. It's like a it's it's important as though it were the Bible, but there's no deity that is involved in the Tao, and not one single deity. The Tao is like the Great Way. The Great Way is easy, it says. Yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered within the Tao. When rich speculators prosper, while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible, while the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. It is not in keeping with the Tao. Mic drop. Boom. Number 54. Whoever is planted in the Tao will not be rooted up. Whoever embraces the Tao will not slip away. Her name will be held in honor from generation to generation. Let the Tao be present in your life and you will become genuine. Let it be present in your family and your family will flourish. Let it be present in your country and your country will be an example to all countries in the world. Let it be present in the universe and the universe will sing. How do I know this is true? By looking inside myself. Wow. So Lao Tzu says, I think I'll read that one again. The great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered within the Tao. When rich speculators prosper while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible while the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. It is not in keeping with the Tao. Make drop. Boom, 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 boom. So here we have a story in memory of L.H.W. by Dorothy Canfield Fisher in the Book of Virtues by William J. Bennett, a treasury of great moral stories edited with commentary. So, let's see if I can get this here without doing anything bad. Okay. In memory of LHW, this is a story of a lifetime of struggle made noble by compassion, responsibility, work, and a host of other virtues. I had been looking for responsibility and I found this one on perseverance instead. It reminds us that in keeping It reminds us that in helping others persevere, we find the strength and courage and purpose to persevere ourselves. Vermont writer Dorothy Canfield Fisher, who was born in 1879 and passed in 1958, said that as a child she knew the protagonist of this story, a New England farmer born to a hard life, and one day she realized he was a saint. He began life characteristically depreciated and disparaged. When he was a white, thin, big-headed baby, his mother, stripping the suds from her lean arms, used to inveigh to her neighbors against his existence. Wanted just like that dooless Lem Warren not even to leave me foot-free when he died, but a baby coming. Dooless, in the language of our valley, means a combination of shiftless and impractical, particularly to be scorned. Later, as he began to have some resemblance to the appearance he was to wear throughout life, her resentment at her marriage, which she considered the one mistake in her life, kept pace with his growth. Look at him, she cried to anyone who would listen. Ain't that Warren all over? Did any of my folks ever look so like a born fool? Shut your mouth for the Lord's sake, Lem, and maybe you won't scare folks quite so much. Lem had a foolish, apologetic grin, with which he always used to respond to these personalities, hanging his head to one side and opening and shutting his big hands nervously. The tumble-down, two-roomed house in which the Warrens lived was across the road from the schoolhouse, and Mrs. Warren's voice was penetrating. Lem was accepted throughout his school life at the home estimate. The ugly, overgrown boy, clad in cast-off, misfit clothing, was allowed to play with the other children only on condition that he perform all the hard, uninteresting parts of any game. Inside the schoolroom, it was the same. He never learned to shut his mouth, and his speech was always halting and indistinct, so that he not only did not recite well in class, but was never in one of the school entertainments. He chopped the wood and brought it in, swept the floor and made the fires, and then listened in grinning, silent admiration while the others, arrayed in their best, spoke pieces and sang songs. He was not, quote, smart at his books, end quote, and indeed did not learn even to read very fluently. This may have been partly because the only books he ever saw were old school books, the use of which was given him free on account of his mother's poverty. He was not allowed, of course, to take them from the schoolroom, but if he was not good at book learning, he was not without accomplishments. He early grew large for his age and strong from much chopping of wood and drawing of water for his mother's washings, and he was the best swimmer of all those who bathed in the cold, swift mountain stream which rushes near the schoolhouse. The chief consequence of this expertness was that in the summer he was forced to teach each succeeding generation of little boys to swim and dive. They tyrannized over him unmercifully, as in fact everyone did. Nothing made his mother more furious than such an exhibition of what she called Lem's meachiness. Ain't you got no standing up in ya? She was wont to exhort him angrily. If you don't look out for yourself in this world, you needn't think anybody else is going to. The instructions, they spell it nicely. The instructions in ethics he received at her hands were the only ones he ever knew. For up to his 14th year, he never had clothes respectable enough to wear to church, and after that, he had other things to think of. 14 years is what we call in our state over school age, quote unquote. It was a date to which Mrs. Warren had looked forward with eagerness. After that, the long, unprofitable months of enforced schooling would be over. Lem would be earning steady wages, and she could sit back and, quote, live decent, end quote. It seemed to her more than she could bear that almost upon her son's birthday she was stricken down with paralysis. It was the first calamity for which she could not hold her marriage responsible, and her bitterness thereupon extended itself to fate in general. She cannot have been a cheerful housemaid during the next 10 years when Lem was growing silently to manhood. He was in demand as, quote, help, end quote, on the farms about him, on account of his great strength and faithfulness, although the farmers found him exasperatingly slow, and when it was a question of animals, not always sure to obey orders. He could be trusted to be kind to horses, unlike most hired men we get nowadays, but he never learned, quote, how to get the work out of their hide, end quote. It was his way on a steep hill with a heavy load to lay down the whip, get out, and put his own powerful shoulder to the wheel. If this failed, he unloaded part of the logs and made 2 trips of it. The uncertainty of his progress can be imagined. The busy and impatient farmer and sawyer at the opposite ends of his route were driven to exhaust their entire vocabulary of objurgation on him. He was, they used to inform him in conclusion, the most duelist critter of the Lord ever made. He was better with cows and sheep. Feddler Phelan, his mother said scornfully, watching him feed a sick ewe, and he had here, even in comparison with his fellow men, a fair degree of success. It was indeed the foundation of what material prosperity he ever enjoyed. A farmer, short of cash, paid him one year with 3 or 4 ewes and a ram. He worked for another farmer to pay for the rent of pasture, and had that first year, as everybody admitted, almighty good luck with them. There were several twin lambs born that spring, and every one lived. Lem used to make frequent night visits during lambing time to the pasture to make sure that all was well. I remember as a little girl starting back from some village festivity late one evening late one spring night and seeing a lantern twinkle far up on the mountainside. Lem Warren out fussing with his sheep, someone of my elders remarked. Later, as we were almost home, we saw the lantern on the road ahead of us and stopped the horses, country fashion, for an interchange of salutation. Looking out from under the shawl in which I was wrapped, I saw his tall figure stooping over something held under his coat. The lantern lighted his weather-beaten face and the expression of his eyes as he looked down at the little white head against his breast. "You're foolish, Lem," said my uncle. "The ewe won't own it if you take it away so long the first night." "I I know," stuttered Lem, bringing out the words with his usual difficulty, "but it's mortal cold up on the mounting for little fellers. I'll bring him up as a cosset." The incident reminded me vaguely of something I had read about, and it has remained in my memory. After we drove on, I remember that there were laughing speculations about what language old man Warren would use at having another cosset brought to the house. Not that it could make any more work for her, since Lem did all that was done about the housekeeping. Chained to her chair by her paralyzed legs as she was, she could accomplish nothing more than to sit and cavil at the management of the universe all day until Lem came home, gave her her supper, and put her to bed. Badly run as she thought the world, for a time it was more favorable to her maternal prosperity than she had ever known it. Lem's flock of sheep grew and thrived. For years, nobody in our valley has tried to do much with sheep because of dogs, and all Lem's neighbors told him that some fine morning he would find his flock torn and dismembered. They even pointed out the particular big collie dog who would most likely go sheep mad. End quote. Lem's heavy face drew into anxious, grotesque wrinkles at this kind of talk, and he visited the uplying pasture more and more frequently. One morning, just before dawn, he came, pale and shamefaced, to the house of the owner of the collie. The family, roused from bed by his knocking, made out from his speech, more incoherent than usual, that he was begging their pardon for having killed their dog. "I saw where he'd bit the throats of the two ewes that was due to lamb in a few days, and I guess I must have kind of gone crazy. They was ones I liked special. I'd brought 'em up myself. They was all over blood, you know." They peered at him in the gray light, half afraid of the tall apparition. "How could you kill a great big dog like Jack?" they asked wonderingly. In answer, he held out his great hands and his huge corded arms, red with blood up to the elbow. "I heard him worrying another sheep, and I just killed him." One of the children now cried out, "But I shut Jackie up in the woodshed last night." Someone ran to open the door, and the collie bounded out. Lem turned white in thankfulness. "I'm mortal glad," he stammered. "I felt awful bad afterward. I knew your young ones thought a sight of Jack." "But what dog did you kill?" they asked. Some of the men went back up the mountain with him and found, torn in pieces and scattered wide in bloody fragments, as if destroyed by some great revenging beast of prey, the body of a big gray wolf. Once in a while one wanders over the line from the Canada forests and comes down into our woods following the deer. The hard-headed farmers who looked on that savage scene drew back from the shambling man beside them in the only impulse of respect they ever felt for him. It was the one act of his life to secure the admiration of his fellow men. It was an action of which he himself always spoke in horror and shame. Certainly his marriage aroused no admiration. It was universally regarded as most adulterated, imbecile affair from beginning to end. One of the girls who worked at the hotel in the village got into trouble, quote, end quote, as our vernacular runs, and as she came originally from our district and had gone to school there, everyone knew her and was talking about the scandal. Old man Warren was of the opinion, spiritedly expressed, that Lottie was a fool not to make that drummer marry her. She could have if she'd gone the right way to work. but the drummer remained persistently absent. One evening Lem, starting for his sheep pasture for his last look for the night, heard someone crying down by the river, and then, as he paused to listen, heard it no more. He jumped from the bridge without stopping to set down his lantern, knowing well the swiftness of the water, and caught the poor cowardly thing as she came, struggling and gasping, down with the current. He took her home and gave her dry clothes of his mother's. Then, leaving the scared and repentant child by his hearth, he set out on foot for the minister's house and dragged him back over the rough country roads. When Ma'am Warren awoke the next morning, Lem did not instantly answer her imperious call, as he had done for so many years. Instead, a red-eyed girl of Mrs. Warren's own nightgowns in one of Mrs. Warren's own nightgowns came to the door and said shrinkingly, "Lem slept in the barn last night. He give his bed to me, but he'll be in soon. I see him fussing around with the cow." Ma'am Warren stared, transfixed with a premonition of irremediable evil. "What you doing here?" she demanded, her voice devoid of expression through stupefaction. The girl held down her head. "Lem and I were married last night," she said. Then Mrs. Warren found her voice. When Lem came in, it was to a scene of furious wrangling which was henceforth to fill his house. "To saddle himself with such trash as you," his mother was saying ragingly. So we are on page 587. We will continue this later. And I hope you have a great day. Morsels of a thought of wisdom are intended to give you some ideas of what to do during your day. Knowing the right thing to do is wisdom, and as the fortune cookie said, virtue is the actual doing of it. So I hope you go out and do something good. Perseverance is the story of Lem and his mama being real mean, and the woman that he's marrying. We're gonna see what happens with the argument between the mama and everybody else. Something's falling. So there we go. Sorry. Okay. Good day. Okay. Old Kendrick and good morning, John Clark. Good morning, AC Rosita. Good morning, Susan Shamut. Good morning, Carmen Smith. Good morning. I guess I call you JP if I can. And then good morning to your wife. And Tom Krebs and Tom Krebs' wife. Okay. Oh, Kinderhook.